good fortune continued. As I looked for little El Cerrito, I found it in every census that it might have been in. Wonderful. Beginning 1841, a Mexican census. Then 1850, the United States has taken over. 1848, the end of the Mexican War. So 1850, 60, 70, 80. 85, there was a special census in 5 states only in the U.S. One of those 5 states was New Mexico, and El Cerrito was there. Then there's no 1890 census because the original records are destroyed. They were destroyed in a fire in a basement in a building in Washington, D.C. Then 1900, 10, 20. I mean, it was marvelous. Well, you have all, you know, cross-sections, and you know your people, you know your families, you know who's died already and who's been born and all that. So, so I was very fortunate. And then the last thing by way of good fortune is that I started this study in the early 1990s, and I began to interview every person in the village. Well, you know, that didn't take too many days. And, you know, I sat with Rick Quintana, and Rick and I had some maps, and we pulled them out. And I said, now, Rick, tell me who owns this you know, long lot, this parcel of land. And Rick knew every detail of every boundary and every name that fit on every plot of land, and I appreciated that help very much. And there's a map in the book that thanks Rick Quintana for his help on putting together, you know, the ownership pattern today. This was as of 2000 for land in El Cerrito. So, okay, my good fortune then was that I was able to identify half a dozen villagers who were quite old and quite sharp and could tell me things that nobody else in this village knew. And one of those half a dozen people was Henry Arellanes. And I learned about Henry from his cousin Adan Quintana in Las Vegas. Adan says, oh, you have to go talk to Henry. He's done some genealogy work on the Quintana family, and he knows about this stuff. Well, I'd never even heard of Henry, so I go to Albuquerque. I went back to Henry Arellanes 7 times to talk to him, because every time I'd leave, you know, even as I'm driving away almost, I have more questions to ask the guy. And I'm writing them down, you know. I mean, you don't think of them all at once. So I had access to half a dozen people. Cándido Aragon was one of them. Cerrito Aragon was another. Eduardo Quintana, then in his 90s, up in Pueblo, was another. A person by the name of Mary Sena, up in Pueblo. Went to grade school here, up through the 8th grade, then moved down to Variadero with her family. And her family was Vivian Quintana family. And I'll tell you, this was remarkable for me because I learned things that nobody else could tell me. And, you know, one wonders if I'd started this study 10 years earlier, how many more of those people may still have been alive. I don't know. That might have been helpful. But at least I got in, you know, at the very end because they're all dead now. With one exception, they're all gone.
Quintana in Pueblo still is alive, and Henry's still alive.
Henry Arellanes died.
Who's that, Armijo?
Yes, Henry Armijo is still alive, and I talked to him I ended up talking to 60 people, and I mean talking to him at length. I'd call them up, I'd make an appointment, I'd go. The first thing I'd ask them was, look, I got a tape recorder here. Do you mind if I turn that on? Oh, no, I don't like that, no. I don't want any of that. Well, then what you do with your tape recorder is put it away, you know. The answer was no, he didn't want you to do this, or she. But some of them said sure, and so I have at least 15 of the 60 tape recorded. And Cándido was one of the guys that said, sure, go ahead and tape me. But then when I got into sensitive questions, and I knew Cándido knew about this, I could see it on his face. because you see there was a big dispute here in El Cerrito in about 1900, actually maybe 1890. And the dispute was between two families. One family was the Quintana family, and the other was the Manzanares family. And the two principals, Fernando Quintana and, oh boy, Manzanares. I don't remember his first name now. Luis, I think. Anyway, the two principals were just about exactly the same age, and they both married into the village at about exactly the same time. And they both married well. And by marrying well, what that means is they married women whose fathers owned land that they would inherit. So these two guys immediately rose up in the village because they'd married well. They were ambitious, both of them, and they had sons. Now that's critically important. They both had roughly 8 children, I think, and each of them had 4 or 5 sons. Well, you got to have sons. There are things to be done, you know, that women didn't do. I mean, it wasn't they couldn't, but they didn't. Agricultural things. So they had sons, and they both rose up, and then it was the second generation. It wasn't the principals. It was their children that got into major squabble. And you hear stories about how somebody was in the irrigation ditch, and a Manzanares took a shovel and went like that on the guy, the Quintana's head, you know. And then the Quintana relative goes and gets a gun and goes after the Manzanares that did it. I mean, they got in a real squabble. So that by 1900, the census shows that there was only one Manzanares family left in the village. And the Quintanas were the ones that became then the main family, and in fact, continue to be the main family, with most of the surnames being Quintana in the village today.